this is the last Monday Majlis of this academic year, and we wanted it to be splendid. So we have been organizing this for years. It was also the case of Zahra last week that it took years to set up one, and what made that long in the case of Alexander's is that we wanted him to be physically also here. So and he is here, and we talked about Superman, academic being a Superman by definition, with all the weaknesses of every superhero. Now he is a Superman, I can tell you. He flew in today. I don't know, did you fly from California? So he flew from California. Then he took a car, which him driving. So he hired a car at Heathrow. He came here, and then he gave a reading seminar, Abu Tamam. For those who know poetry, they will appreciate what it must be. And then he had a break of 20 minutes, and he's giving this talk now. So I think I'm sitting just by side of a paraphenomenon, and I'm very, very happy to have him as the conclusion of the series for this year. And I have to admit, it was not my brilliant idea to invite him at the beginning. I asked my colleagues whom they would like to invite, and Emily said Alexander Key, and then it was not difficult to agree. And because it was Emily's idea, I would like Emily to give some further introduction before Alexander will present himself.
Hello, sorry, you're both using kind of blurred in profile as I address the corner of the room. Hello, I hope you can hear me. Everybody online? Great. This is Alexander Key. He got his PhD at Harvard in 2012 and is now an associate professor at the University of Stanford in comparative literature. He's wrote a book a few years ago called Language Between God and the Poets, which I universally recommend to any students with questions about the Arabic language, about poetry, or about life in general. I wrote a book review of that book when I was myself going crazy trying to understand Sakaki's Miftah al-Ulum, another book about the Arabic language. The Key to the Sciences is the title of that book. And just as a little anecdote, I had a strange dream at that time, which was all about keys, and it had Alexander Key in it. It had some weird key metaphors and some Arabic language type swirly things going around. So ever since, I have thought of Alex as being the key to the sciences himself. So I guess if you need a superhero name, you're Alexander al-Miftah. And we're very happy to welcome you today.
Can you
now I'm
Okay, hello everyone. It's great to see everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces. Is the sound okay? It's a little bit faint. How? Maybe I just need to talk a bit louder. Is this okay? Is this okay? Still a bit quiet? Okay.
I'll give you this one then. I just unmute it, Robs.
Now.
Yeah. Yeah, turn the volume up. Now try.
Okay. Now I'm Rob Gleave. This is great because this means that just as I come to the point in the talk where I have to talk about biography, I embody the personage of, the most, successful senior scholar. This is it. This means that any like institutional building I try is automatically going to succeed. Very exciting. Okay, yeah, it's great to see everybody. Thank you ever so much for coming. It's great to see some familiar faces. Jan, Yaron, some other people here. Antonella. Great to see everybody. And I'd like to thank Emily for the kind introduction. And I'd also like to thank Emily for the review of my book, which came out right when I was at that stage of worrying if anything I'd said in the book was okay. And Emily's review was very positive, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. It's one of those like, oh, the reader gets it without me, and I only communicated through the book itself. And of course, this band's hosting has been exemplary. It's really great to be able to come and do this Majlis in person. I really appreciate it. I'm very happy to be here. I really am. Exeter is like a place I'm always very happy to come. You know, partly for the countryside, but really for the kind of intellectual hub that's been created here, which is a valuable thing. So in accordance with the style of the Majlis that Istvan has created and curated, I'm going to talk briefly about kind of myself, and then I'm going to talk some more about the poetry and the abstract that you read. I mean, talking about myself, I'm constantly reminded by my children and spouse not to make it about myself all the time. It's not about you, Dad, they say. Nah, the format is forcing me to do it. That's what's happening. So, but I'll try and spend more time on the poems for structural and philosophical reasons that are really part of the talk themselves. So I grew up in the north of England, in the northwest of England, in a small village of I think about 1,500 people in Much Hole, and you know my parents were horrific intellectual snobs who thought they were kind of better than everyone else in the village because they'd been to undergraduate elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And then when I was trying to get into universities through the UCAS system, I applied to Durham because I wanted to do history and politics. And I applied to 2 degrees at Durham, and I didn't get into either of them. I think because, you know, they didn't believe I was going to get my predicted grades. And then I'd put a sort of chancer application into St Andrews to do politics and IR, which was actually harder than Durham, but then I ended up getting into the St Andrews one. And then at St Andrews, you had to pick a language with IR. And I was just skimming the prospectus, you know, what language am I going to pick? And there was this picture, some of you, I may have told this story to before. There was this picture of a blonde young woman in the desert, you know, saying how she'd studied Arabic and now she had all these great opportunities. And I was like, all right, you know, I'm probably going somewhere else anyway, not to St Andrews. And so then I find myself at St Andrews doing international relations and Arabic. My first ever Arabic teacher is Julia Bray, who's now an emerita professor at Oxford. And quickly got the sense from her that this wasn't just like a language you take for fun on the side. This was a serious intellectual endeavor that there were no kind of shortcuts on whatsoever. And then I just kind of kept going. And I think at the time I thought I was, you know, really breaking the mold and striking out on my own, and no one like me from the village had ever studied Arabic, and you know it was this unique, fascinating language. This is all pre 9/11, and then you know when I look back on it, and I look back on it having lived in the Middle East for a number of years and read more and more, I realized that really I was just going along these well-worn train tracks of Orientalism, whereby, it used to be the British Empire would take young men, who were bored and wanted to see the world, and it would ship them off to the Middle East. It's part of the British Empire. And then when I did it, it was, teaching English, or it was human rights, or it was development. But it was the same train tracks. It was the same kind of imperial, post-imperial, Orientalist train tracks. So I wasn't quite as kind of unique as I thought I was at the time. I after my undergraduate degree, I tried to get a variety of different jobs with little success. Particular low points were a rejection from Lush soap shops to sell soap, which I boycotted those shops ever since. They made me work for a whole afternoon for no money as the interview, and then they gave me some broken bits of soap and were like, sorry, there's no job. I'm still bitter about it. Yeah. And a whole slew of other job rejections. And I ended up getting an internship in Nazareth to work with a human rights organization working with the Palestinian minority inside Israel. And that was better than it was unpaid, but they paid for rent. So it was better than being unemployed in Brixton and paying for my own rent. Went to Nazareth, worked at the Muassasa al-Arabiya li Huquq al-Insan for just under 2 years. Then got a job with one of their funders, Muassasa Ta'awun, which was a big Palestinian development organization working in the West Bank and Gaza and inside Israel. Lived in just north of Jerusalem for a couple of years, working on this big development project. And then my then girlfriend, now wife, who I met there. Met a fellow kind of expat, though. She's Korean American. And then she was going to law school. So then I applied for PhD programs and got rejected by, I think, half of the programs I applied to, and got into Harvard on the wait list. And didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And I'd emailed Wolfhart Heinrichs to say, I sent him this email being like, so tell me a bit about yourself and the program. And in hindsight, the idea of asking, one of the titans of this field, to tell me a bit about yourself was mind-bogglingly insulting. But being the mu'addab, like great kind of person that he was, he just replied and went, oh, here are some of the recent articles I've written in the Encyclopedia of Islam, do let me know. And then he was incredibly encouraging. He didn't hold that against me at all, and was a kind of inspirational advisor the whole way through my PhD. He also just kind of let us follow the text, in the sense that I wanted to work on al-Raghib al-Isfahani, and I had this idea based on Everett Rosen had the entry on Raghib al-Isfahani in the Encyclopedia of Islam, in which he said that he combined reason and revelation. So I had this whole idea of doing a PhD on kind of the concept of the secular, the concept of revelation and reason, the aql and the shar'. And I wrote a big kind of 10,000 word prospectus about this, which was approved. And then when I started reading al-Raghib, Raghib's At-Tariya and al-Makarim al-Sharia and the Tafsil and the I'tiqadat, I realized that for Raghib, he believed in talazum al-aql wal-shar', like this was something he said explicitly in the Tafsil and elsewhere, but it wasn't really what all his work was about. And the more I read, the more I thought that what Raghib was really about was this linguistic methodology, this way of approaching all the different problems of aqidah and tafsir and akhlaq through fixing relationships between alfaz and ma'ani, between like saying, oh, well, there's a lot, there's a concept here that we can break into different concepts, or there's a lot here that plays out with one way with regards to God and one way with regards to humanity. So then I kind of completely ditched the prospectus. And again, Wolfhart Heinrichs was okay with this. And I wrote a dissertation all about Raghib's language theory. This was when I went on the job market in 2012, and there were still jobs, right? It was the end of the 9/11 decade. And so that big wave of hiring, like the big wave of global hiring, was still around in a way it isn't really around now, kind of 10 years later. And again, like I somehow got rejected from all the jobs that I thought I'd be perfect for, like the NELC jobs, where I was like so well qualified for these jobs. And of course, better people got them. You know, Asad Ahmad got the job at Berkeley that I had my heart set on. I mean, which was not a bad decision by Berkeley at all, because he'd already written like 2 books by that point. He is a truly kind of great scholar. And so I ended up I ended up in a comparative literature department at Stanford. And really I was realizing this as I was planning what to say in this Majlis. And really the last kind of decade at Stanford, and I've now been in comparative literature longer than I've been in any other discipline. Like 11 years in comp lit at Stanford is longer than I was in Arabic and Islamic studies at Harvard. And without wishing to kind of go back to the bitterness theme, there's still this sense that inside comparative literature, there's this sort of constant work to justify the importance of Arabic, to say that, you know, Arabic is a space that's so big, it's so kind of cross-cultural, cross-continental, cross-millennial, that you can do infinite kind of comparative projects within Arabic because it's such a big language. And that's a hard sell, you know, in a comparative literature department where the assumption is, you know, no, you should be doing French and German and, you know, Slavic, for example. So it really, I think I remember I wrote something for the American Comparative Literature Association, State of the Discipline, in 2014, in which I said this kind of, it's this struggle where everybody thinks that Arabic is really valuable and everybody wants to hire an Arabist in comp lit, and everyone kind of likes the idea of making the discipline global, but nobody really reads it or employs enough Arabists for them to have a conversation. So you're in this kind of edge situation the whole time. And that's still just as true today as it was when I wrote that thing for ACLA 7 years ago. But I think that what comp lit has given me that's good, that I'm really grateful for, is this constant prodding about what exactly is this discipline that we're all involved in? What exactly are we doing with these texts? Like, why are we doing this with these texts? Like, what are the commitments that are driving us to work with these texts? And how, you know, how can we justify and think of and imagine our scholarship? And so those kind of questions, I think I've benefited from that sort of questioning for the last decade. And I think it's made the work better. I think it's made, you know, it's made me have more fun with the work, certainly. So I'm not, you know, yeah. Whereas with the Lush soap shop, I'm just relentlessly bitter and negative. And I encourage all never to shop from them. With comp lit, it's much more kind of fun. Like it's been, you know, it's been a fun journey. And I wouldn't kind of leave comp lit, you know, willingly. Certainly not. Okay. When did we start? We have time. What time did we start at? 5:10, maybe? Yeah. Okay. So it's in that, and now I'm kind of shift to the kind of substance of the talk. Sadly, not with any. I can see Yaron, and I can remember when Yaron did the Majlis and played the Ode, and I've got nothing. Like I've got nothing. It's just going to be like a me muttering to Istvan transition. There's going to be no. You know, the only music is the music of the poems themselves. And you should be able to see in the chat a couple of links that I'm just going to put in again. And these 2 links are just links to the poems I'm going to be talking about.
So Alex, you won't get away that easily. I will.
Oh, you think I should
Yeah,
share
While,
something as well?
no, that's all. That's okay. Yes, while Alex is sharing with his screen, and or while you are opening the link, and why I let some people in. I also want to ask you. Well, one very simple question is that so basically what you try to do in your scholarship and in your position is to argue for the universality and universal importance of Arabic literature. So is that the point? What you have to sell, that it is not just an exotic language, but it is universally important for everyone. That's one question, and the other question will be to ask you for some advice, to do's and not to do's, based on your life and academic experiences, if you can. And then
I think that the answer to the kind of advocating for Arabic literature, and again, this again comes back to what I'm going to talk about, is the nature of complete as a discipline is that it doesn't, the only consensus it has on its own identity is a consensus with which it's not comfortable. So as a discipline, comparative literature knows that it comes from Europe, knows that it comes from comparison within Europe of different traditions, the Romani, the French, the German, the Slavic, and how they all connected across history, and knows that that doesn't fit the globe or the future, or certainly California. I mean, it would be ridiculous to have kind of, French, German, Romani, Slavic in California, which is the other side of the world, and ignore the Americas, the hemispheric Americas, Native American culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Complit's only core identity is one with which it isn't happy. And I think that my attitude to kind of Arabic in that discussion is the same thing. I mean, again, this is something I'm going to talk about. Like, we know these texts and we know these ideas and we know they have value because we're reading them. Whether a project of kind of proselytizing for them is appropriate or effective, I think just hangs under a big question mark. I mean, who am I to say that Abu Tamam and al-Buhtari are better than classical Chinese poetry, which I don't know? The one thing I would say is Adam Talib has this beautiful, I think Adam Talib tweeted it at some point, and I've been quoting him ever since, where he said that, if I wanted to work on a minor poetic tradition, I would pick French or English, because they're just not that big in terms of centuries and millions of poems. Like, they're just not that big. They're manageable. Arabic, on the other hand, the Qasida is, he says, so vast, like multilingual, multi-continent, multi-century, that it's a real big topic. And I think that kind of, I share his perspective. I really do. Which is kind of just dodging the question that you asked. The thing that I would say in terms of advice, I think one thing, very seriously is, and Wolfhard Heinrichs was okay with this when I told him I wanted to take a course at the Harvard Business School, and he raised his eyebrows, and but he was fine. He was like, okay, he didn't tell me I couldn't do it and tell me I had to take another course about fiqh, for example. Whereas he was prepared to tell me, you can't start studying Turkish until you've done Persian. And he was also prepared to tell me, your Arabic isn't good enough. You need to go do third year Arabic with Kal Sharif, which was, much needed. So he was prepared to give kind of clear guidance when he needed to. But, can you go take a course at Harvard Business School? Yes. And I think, he would have been okay with me getting a job outside academia. Several of his students went on to very successful careers outside academia. I make clear to my students that careers outside academia are likely to be more profitable and most quite likely more rewarding as well. I mean, I think that's one important bit of advice that it's easy to kind of lose sight of. And the other thing, kind of the sort of the more navel gazing inside academia is, I mean, I really think, and this is something I'm not ashamed to say to my, you know, colleagues in comparative literature, that, or indeed in conversations about theory, is that philology really is the solution. Like, it's just, we just reading the texts and then following what they're trying to do is really the best methodology. And so if anything, and it does, I think, it has caused me some problems when like always picking to read more of the text rather than the secondary sources. Like if you come to a topic of interest through the texts themselves, you can end up duplicating the scholarship, or you can end up kind of miscommunicating the scholarship, but at least you're going to get what the texts are doing. And you can always fix the secondary scholarship later. Like you can always skim the secondary scholarship later when you've worked out what it is that you think that you're doing. Whereas if you do it the other way around, if you have your kind of formative assumptions about the text shaped by the secondary scholarship, and then you go read the text, it's much harder. Like you kind of can't get those framings out of your head. But if the framings come from the text, you can then, jump in and, find what other people have said about them and agree or disagree. I think those are my two. Okay. So
let's the text lead us rather than the theory.
Well, the
forcing the theory on the text.
Yeah, and then I'm gonna talk about irony, and the irony is that I'm now gonna do, like, to some extent, the opposite of what I was talking about. So not really. So I was well, first of all, the text session that Istvan referred to that I did just before this. I mean, I basically had to beg Rob Gleave to let me do it, because I was like, I heard that there was this reading session and there was some, like, maybe it would work out, and I was like, please, I really want to do it. If I'm going to come to Exeter, I really want to do the text session. Like, here's a poem I want to work on. Here's another poem I want to work on. I can definitely make it. And I think that kind of eagerness to, like, get into the poetry was something that I noticed, no question about it. And then again, I was on the plane and I was thinking, should I be thinking about this talk, about the research, or should I be rereading the Abu Tamam poem? And I found myself rereading the Abu Tamam poem and enjoying it and thinking about it sort of more than I was looking forward to the kind of framing of the research talk. So that kind of opposition, like whether one should just commit to the poems or whether one should frame the intellectual project with regards to contemporary scholarship, is something that was in my mind as I've been thinking about this. And I had originally planned just to talk about the framings of the scholarship. But then as I was looking at the poems again, I thought that maybe the poems had in themselves some of the solutions to the problems that I'd been pulling up in the chapter I'm writing about Adab and irony. So the two poems that I'm talking about, one's by Abu Tamam and one's by al-Bukhtari, and I've put them in the chat a few times, and And I'll just briefly share my screen. Oh, could you let Rob do screen share?
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Sure.
So the Abu Tamam poem كانت صروف الزمان من فرقه واقتن أهل الإعدام في ورقه. Oh, let me.
I don't see.
Here we are. Yeah.
I'm-
Yeah. Yeah, this is the Abu Tamam poem, but I am going to kind of jump around a bit, and this doesn't all fit on the page, so I would encourage you to kind of open the links yourselves. This is a poem where he's praising his patron. He's asking his patron for sort of more money. He's complaining that his patron isn't paying him enough money. Again, classic tropes of how we all know classical Arabic poetry works. But he does it by talking to his patron through the figure of time. And he does it by talking to his patron through the figure of time. And time is a circle. Time is this circle that goes round and round, and time is this kind of failing circle that's struggling and behaving badly to the poet. But you get this strong sense that the Abu Tamam knows that he's writing a poem in which he's comparing, a sort of reasonably important Abbasid bureaucrat, Abu Hussein Muhammad bin al-Haytham bin Shabana. He's comparing this politician to time itself. And this is someone who's written poems for caliphs. We can be pretty sure that Abu Tamam is being ironic here. He knows that this guy is not the reason that the entire concept of chronology exists. And yet he says it. And so he says it kind of to make an argument about poetry, to make an argument about what poetry can do. He says it ironically because he wants the patron to kind of recognize his own lack of importance, but still try and fulfill some sense of destiny. It's this, it's an ironic poem about how time is a circle. And time is something that you can't control. Time is something that God controls. As that last line that you have here, Alabasakallahu thawbu afiyatin fi nawmika al-mu'tara wa fi ar-raqiq. It's God who does the work of making time behave well to people. It's God who cures you of your ill. It's God who can cure, time itself of its illnesses. So Abu Tamam like circles of irony. And then, so this kind of question of circles of irony, the way Abu Tamam approaches the poem is it's kind of what I'm talking about when I did this project about Adab and the novel, because there's this irony that we can read contemporary scholarship of the novel being this dominant genre of world literature at the moment, the novel being this genre that's inextricable from stories about modernity and stories about progress and stories that center Europe and center European industrialization and stories that tell that development from a European industrialization to a global capitalist reality. And the novel is the primary genre that is documenting the world we live in at the moment, and it comes from Europe. There's no way to kind of extricate the novel as a genre from that history. You can't really locate it anywhere else. It's a European genre. It does all this work. It's a dominant genre today. So it's kind of interesting that then when you read descriptions of the novel, the way that it mixes different voices, the way that it plays with irony, you can just swap those descriptions onto classical adab and they work. Like, why is it that if we read a description of the novel, we could just swap out the characters and it works just as well? So here I'm gonna, and I think, again, it's hard not to think about this as ironic. So if we take, for example, so this is Ian Watt, who's one of the primary, scholars of the novel, 20th century scholar of the novel. And he's saying, and what I've done in this quote is I've just taken his analysis of Daniel Defoe and Robinson Crusoe and Moll Flanders, and I've just swapped them for Tanukhi and Ibn al-Jassas and Ibn al-Zayyat. So Tanukhi being this, Islamic law judge from the 900s in Basra and Baghdad, who writes Nishwar al-Muhadara and Faraj Ba'ad al-Shidda, two great kind of adab works that have this structure of all these akhbar after each other that play with the reader's expectations. So, Ian Watt, rewritten, says, at-Tanukhi would seem to be the first of our writers who visualized the whole of his narrative as though it occurred in an actual physical environment. His attention to the description of milieu is still intermittent, but occasional vivid details supplement the continual implication of his narrative and make us attach Ibn al-Jassas and Ibn al-Zayyat much more completely to their environments than is the case with previous fictional characters. Characteristically, this solidity of setting is particularly noticeable in at-Tanukhi's treatment of movable objects in the physical world. In the Nishwar, there is much linen and gold to be counted, while Ibn al-Jassas's estate is full of memorable pieces of clothing and hardware. So for anybody who's read the Nishwar, and it's available in Margoliouth's, still very readable English translation, that rings absolutely true. It's the telling it's the occasional vivid detail. It's the thicker characters than we're used to in previous adab. It's the moments where Tanukhi counts how much gold there is and counts how much, there's like 50 gold vases and he enumerates them all. So, and this keeps happening. So why is it that somebody describing Robinson Crusoe is effectively describing Tanukhi? Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, Ibn Tufayl is this kind of that's the actual historical connection, maybe like Hayy ibn Yaqzan and Robinson Crusoe. But this is kind of separate from that. Like, this is just because the irony there is that Hayy ibn Yaqzan doesn't have that narrative detail, right? It's this philosophical, what's the word? It's this philosophical kind of ideal story that doesn't have these little moments of telling detail that are not necessary for the plot. Like these moments of telling detail, like the amount of turquoise vases or the amount of hectares that Ibn al-Jassas has in his estates outside Baghdad. Tanukhi doesn't put these in for the plot or the argument. He just puts them in for color. He does exactly the same thing that Ian Watt identifies in Robinson Crusoe, putting details in for color. And Ian Watt says that this is one of the fundamental techniques of the genre of the modern novel. But Tanukhi's not a modern novel, and Ian Watt had never read it. And so I mean, this is why I think that the Abu Tamam poem, like time is a circle, you just get this circle filled up with irony. You can, in fact, only get irony. This is Paul de Man. This is my complete theory moment. My advice is Paul de Man is always fun to read. And often you read his articles and you're like, there's this line that you're just like, this is brilliant. Like this helps me see this concept of irony or metaphor in a completely new way. And then you read the rest of the article and it's like, it doesn't really go anywhere. No, Paul de Man is just is always worth reading for those insights, but you can never get anywhere. Paul de Man on irony, it's like irony is inherent to history. So it's the divisions between the reader and the text and the gaps between one text and another that are chronological. You can only have an unironic text in the absence of correspondences to other texts, right? Irony in text comes from this chronological cross-cutting of connections to other texts. Irony lives in the myth, scheme, or sport across chronology and context. Yeah, that's why Tanukhi and Tawhidi and other Adab scholars are fundamentally ironic. They're texts for a time, constituted by the combinations of texts for other times, and read by readers in a variety of different times. Like the ironies are all in the chronological interstices, and they're limitless. Like the irony is about the lack of control of meaning. So it's only in these situations when you have text being used and put next to other texts from different times and contexts, it's those gaps are where the ironies occur. Okay. And I won't go into more details of the parallels between the genre of adab and the modern novel, but there's quite a lot, and the more you read of scholarship of the modern novel, the more parallels you see. Sean Nagai at Chicago has got this concept of sublimity, which is this, like she says, it's this combination of shock and boredom at like how much power and money people have in novels. And she's talking about film and contemporary literature in the 21st century. This concept of sublimity, just like, what do you even do with this stuff? This feels like how Tanukhi is writing in the Nishwa. He's this judge in Basra, and he's just looking at these caliph courts and the violence and the stupidity and the vast wealth, and it gets lost so quickly. And it doesn't seem to mean anything. And they have so much money, and then they just kill each other, or maybe they don't. And do they deserve it, or do they like this? And it's like the authorial voice in those Adab connections has got what Shanghai calls sublimity. Just Tanukhi is just looking at this stuff, looking at these caliphal courts. You know, the way that the narrator in novels doesn't have a voice but is there is like the way Tanukhi and other Adab authors who use a kind of free flow of khabars, like one after the other, not in chapters and subchapters. You can see an authorial voice there, but it never really identifies itself. Like the character is a narrator, the narrator is a character, it just kind of pops in. Again, the way people write about the character narrator in the modern novel is really useful for thinking about how Tanukhi thinks. You know, the carnival, like Bakhtin's whole idea of the carnival and the tragicomic, again, like perfectly explains why Tanukhi is like, it's a Jid wal Hazal, like perfectly explains why Jahiz, Tanukhi, these classical Arab writers are like mixing in jokes and the scatological and the obscene and the divine. And the concern that the novel has for its own form, like novels are always asking questions about how novels work in a variety of philosophical and formal experiments. And Adab is doing the same thing. It's always probing at its own isnads. It's always asking, like, if we have this thing and it looks true and it's got a good isnad, and we have this thing but it's contradictory but it has an equally good isnad. And Adab is always like, and it's always gesturing to the reader that this is moral, this is immoral. It's always like playing with its own form. So over and over again, like, and then the last one is there's a very recent, a book came out with Stanford University Press called The Grounds of the Novels in 2024. And again, talking about like 21st century novels, this idea of the grounds of the novel being like the physical spaces in which the novel takes place, like the physical ground that appears through the writing. And yeah, you take that idea to Tanukhi and you suddenly realize, which I hadn't realized before, that Tanukhi's Nishwa takes place inside, right? The grounds of Tanukhi's Nishwa are inside people's rooms in Basra. And the action at the caliphal court is always inside. It's inside people's houses. Even when things happen that are outside, they're reported by people talking inside. Even when somebody sees like somebody killing a lion in a pool out in the desert, they see them because they're in a house, a ruined house that they got their servants to like brick up a bit to protect themselves. There's this consistent insideness that like grounds the whole of this adab work about Tanukhi's adab work. It's always inside. Like, so again, this is an example where you read a book in the 21st century that's about other books in the 21st century, and it helps you understand the book that was written 1,000 years ago in a completely different context that the person writing in the 21st century doesn't even know existed. And then you find yourself, this kind of goes back to Ishvan's question, you find yourself in a comparative literature department, like, why am I even using this contemporary Californian theory to talk about something that's 1,000 years old, and then finding it useful? Like, again, like, it's this, you can't get away from the irony, and you can't get away from the chronological gaps. The irony just kind of keeps coming as we go back through time and difference. So if it's all just like a big circle of irony, which is kind of where I ended the chapter. It's all just a great big circle of irony. We're going around in circles. Like, Tanukhi was an onlooker to his world. I'm an onlooker in my world. Tanukhi was looking at politics. He couldn't influence it. I look at politics in America and the UK, and I can't influence it. We just kind of spin round and round with the texts. That's kind of where I ended the chapter draft. And then I was thinking, but like, what about this other poem, the Buhtari poem, that I just put the link to up? Here we are. So this is a 6-line wasp. And sorry. Again, probably best if you open the link on your own and can get the poem rather than seeing my like bad handwriting notes on it. So if time is a circle and we're just, Tanukhi, modern stories of the novel, we're in that kind of ironic loop that Abu Tamam was talking about, where people don't really say what they mean. And like, he really just wanted to get paid, but he pretended he was talking to time because time is a circle. It's like, how can we get out of this circle? I mean, Buhtari, I think, has an answer here. So the first word of this poem, وَرَوْدٍ الطل وشيا مجددا فأضحى مقيما للنفوس ومقعدا إذا ما انسكاب الماء أينت خلته وقد كسرت ريحة الريح بردا. The very first word of this poem, wa, wow rubba. So it's wow rubba. It's wow rubba bima'na kam. Kam Browdin. How many a meadow? What al-Buhtari is doing, I think, is effectively breaking, like, is seeing the circle of time and saying that meadows are universal. Like, how many a meadow? It doesn't matter, I mean, and I would be like, it doesn't matter if it's Wordsworth's meadows, it doesn't matter if it's Buhtari's meadows. A meadow is a meadow, rain is rain. This poetic moment of description that al-Buhtari is talking about is universal. Waraudin, how many a meadow? It's like this kind of poem, like, it's because time is circular that poems work. It's because, like, a dahr keeps going round and round and round with all its ironies, that poems like this work, because we can all think, how many a meadow? Even though we have no kind of concepts of, like, Buhtari's context. It was so far away and so distant. How many a meadow? And then he goes on to say, like, how many a meadow has, like, the dew made patterns with, and, like, anew every morning. And then he goes into sort of meta-poetics, like, it's this view of the meadow is going to do something to your soul. It's going to make you feel a certain way. Like, makes your soul stand up, makes your soul sit down. So there's an impact of a vision of beauty. And then, in the mensikabul ma'i, ayanta, if you look at it, khiltahu, you imagine it. So I get the second line to the poem says, if you look, the poem tells you that if you look at the physical image, then you're going to imagine things. So that's like the poem telling you how the poem works. Then you imagine it, وَقَدْ كَسَرَتْهُ رَيْحَةُ الرِّيحِ بُرِّدًا وَخِلْتَهُ بُرِّدًا وَقَدْ كَسَرَتْهُ رَيْحَةُ الرِّيحِ. It's like hashum. So you imagine that the wind is breaking the rain. So the rain's coming down straight. The wind is breaking it. So it's breaking the straight lines of the rain. And you imagine that the wind is making the rain cold. So again, al-Buhtari is giving us an image, telling us it has an impact on our souls, giving us an image of the rain, lines of rain getting broken by the wind, telling us how we imagine that the rain has emotions. So the poetry, again, like the poetry is telling you how poetry works. Again, cutting out of the time is a circle, everything's ironic. The claim that the poem is making is that this description, this descriptive mode, wasf, is universal. We've all seen meadows. We've all seen visual images. We've all seen rain. We all imagine. Right? The poem is telling you how the poem works. And then he, and then there's another great image where he's like, and if the wind stops blowing, if the wind stops blowing, then the rain will come straight down. If it comes straight down, it looks like a sword. So وإذا سكنت عنه حسبت صفاءه حساما ثقيلا صافي المتن جربدا, drawn. So like the wind's blowing, the lines of rain get broken. You think that the rain is getting cold. Then if the wind stops, the lines come back and you think of like swords being drawn. Then he talks about the doves singing this beautiful song that makes you forget these two famous Umayyad singers. And then he says, فلا تجفون الدهر ما دام مسعدا ومد السرعة ما قد هباك بها يدا. So, you know, don't push fate away as long as fate is still kind of making you happy, and as long as it's like the journey is continuing in which fate is reaching out a hand to help. And then the stress I put on the wa in the first line, وخذها مداما من غزال كأنه إذا ما سقى بدرا تحمل فرقدا. Take the hand of fate. And in fact, this idea of the hand of fate also appears in the Abu Tamam poem, in which he tells the time to take its hand off the patron, like take your hand off this guy and it'll be better. Here, again, like think of like time is a circle. It's because time is a circle that Bakhtari can make this universal intervention about poetry and description. And then the hand of fate reaches out of the circle and the poem tells you to grab it. And so it's like you break the circle, hand of fate reaches out, the poem tells you to grab the hand of fate. And how do you grab it? You grab it as if you were taking wine from a beautiful young boy, from a ghazal. So again, like Bakhtari sees the sort of, it's because time is a circle that he can tell you about this meadow and describe it and describe how imagery works in the poem. And then he can tell you to grasp the hand of fate that comes out of time and to pull it kind of into your own reality where you're drinking wine. So it like pulls the cosmic scale of the poem and the talking to fate right down into your own kind of human experience in the moment. Taking the hand of fate is a massive kind of complex, like cosmic image. How can you take the hand of fate, right? Fate doesn't have hands. But you take it and you take it like you are grabbing the hand of a beautiful person standing right next to you. So it's like poetry reaches out of the circle, and it reaches out of the circle as experience, like as an experience that human beings have, like in their bodies. So that is kind of the tentative resolution of the irony problem. Like I set up the irony problem with the help of Abu Tamam. I noted this kind of spinning of irony of texts across time with the descriptions of the novel working just as well as the descriptions of Adab, and despite the fact that nobody knew anything. And it's kind of a problem without a solution, this spinning irony of time. And then I read the Bakhtari poem as like both the advantage of time being a circle and the way to get out of the circle, because it's these moments of lyric that have universal claims, in this case about a meadow and about beauty and about how poetry works, that reach out of time and come into your life as experience, like you are grabbing the hand of fate. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander. Yeah, so there was this spontaneous eruption of applause, which I wanted to invite for, but it was not necessary. Okay, so talking about time and circles, we can put points in those circles, like finishing this talk was one. And then it will circle on with the questions, and also, well, that's the end of the recordings of our Monday Majlises, and it was, I think, quite nice of Mark this endpoint on a circle, because we will continue Monday Majlis is in the next academic term with a proper firework, which this talk truly was. So I will thank again Alexander for this splendid talk, and close the recording, and then invite you to ask your question. Maybe raise your digital hands if you are there online, or send just a message, and also here in the room. Thank you, Alexander, again.